Tergrid, God of Fright, 5 mana for legendary creature god, a 4/5 with menace. Whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. On the back is Tergrid's Lantern, 4 mana legendary artifact. Tap, target player loses 3 life unless they sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. And you can pay 4 mana to untap Tergrid's Lantern. So Tergrid is the god of fear and is was born a warrior on Kaldheim. And when she was a baby, she had these fits of crying where she would speak some incomprehensible madness language that would make people temporarily go crazy that heard her crying. And then as she started becoming a young child, her shadow came to life and attacked her, and then she fought it off and gained some amount of control over it, and then now it just follows her around. And it has its own card too, Tergrid Shadow, a 5 mana instant. Each player sacrifices 2 creature, and then you can foretell it and cast it for 4 mana instead.
Okay, so
and its flavor text is kind of relevant too, so I'll read it real quick. Tergrid, God of Fright, never acknowledges her own shadow or its murderous deeds.
So her shadow herself is her own, its own entity. She doesn't control it.
Right. So she is the god of fright, the god of fear.
Yeah.
Her shadow is just some kind of monster that it's hard to tell if it was born from her or not. She was sort of born a god because she came from the world tree as Alrund attempted to communicate with it. Whatever communication magic he was using kind of drew her and her twin Essica from the tree. So I'm assuming she always had powers when she was young, and she was strong enough when she was 4 years old, it said, to fight off the shadow as it tried to strangle her when she was a kid. But the entity is not a god, but it's hard to tell exactly what it is.
Sure.
And Tergrid's Lantern, according to its flavor text, is what kind of kept it separated from her when she was young. The light from it, kept it away or kept it weaker. It's hard to tell.
It looks like it's world tree colors inside there.
It does look like that, yeah, on the artwork.
Mm-hmm.
So Dan, I know you've played against Tergrid and her lantern already.
I've played against Tergrid's Lantern. I have not played against Tergrid, although they seem like they would work really well in unison. But, mostly when doing arena drafts, that's how I've come across it.
Yeah, Tergrid's Lantern, the turn you play it could actually impact the board or impact their hand or impact their life total, where Tergrid herself is just a non-haste 4/5 that if you don't have another way to enable her, she doesn't really do much.
Yeah, but a 5 mana 4/5 menace in limited in the right situation is totally acceptable.
That's true.
And black, you might have other ways to discard. Yeah, so Tergrid's Lantern, playing against it really is a scary experience. The clock starts ticking down fast.
As you decide which of the 3 things you want to choose.
Well, right, and it's usually life first. You usually have enough of life cushion when they start. So you're like, okay, I can lose 3 life a few turns in a row. But then they start untapping the lantern. All of a sudden, you're getting really low in life. Maybe they're pressuring your life total in other ways. So you're like, okay, I guess I got to start discarding. You can only really hold 1 or 2 lands. So that starts to that option starts to dwindle, and then you have to start sacrificing the ways you can win in the game, which are your creatures. And I've yet to lose to it, but I've always been every time I played against it, I was a turn away from losing to it. And once they start activating it 2 times, 3 times in a turn, you're like, okay, this is dominating the board.
Yeah, I think in Magic Design, they call this kind of ability a Punisher ability. I think that's what they call it, where it gives your opponent a choice of one or the other, in this case one of 3. And a single instance of this ability is not very good, because they just pick whichever one is the least impactful. If they have an extra card or a card they want to discard, they just
Right.
discard it. If they have a permanent they want to sacrifice, they just permanent, or they lose that. If they have a ton of life, they just do that. And like a single instance doesn't matter, but once you start stacking it up over and over and over again, like
Yeah.
it becomes a real threat, which is something I actually didn't think this card was going to
Yeah.
be very impactful at all, like in a game. But like I see now that once it really starts going, and you can just do it for free every turn, almost like taking up a
Yeah.
planeswalker, you just tick, tick, tick every turn, like not even untapping
Yeah.
it can really generate a lot of a lot more potential than I expected.
And you're right that they're better when you stack the abilities, but this stacks with itself. You can keep doing it every single turn.
Yeah.
And even if it's worth it, you can untap and use it again. So it really just needs itself. It's a great effect, and they've gotten better with these effects. They've just made them a lot more powerful. There's the one from Eldraine that is a 5-mana 8/8, and it gives your opponents 3 goats.
Oh yes.
It's a 5-mana
Blackbridge troll
8/8. Yeah. Trample haste, and then you can sacrifice the one of the goats to
tap it before combat.
I think it taps it, but then they also get to draw a card or something. It's stupid. But it's a pretty good card. You know, you see it every now and then in Constructed.
Yeah, and this wording where it gives
unplayable.
This wording where it gives the option of 3 life, discard a card, or sacrifice an online permanent, I believe came from Amonkhet. There was a curse that did it. There was some Nicol Bolas different curse spell that did it. I think there might have even been an X spell where you could pay X and they had to do it that many times or it repeated a certain number of times.
Yes.
So it's interesting that they transplanted that exact phrasing into here, even though that's not related to any of the curses. But I guess they knew it played really well. I
think it plays well.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what it is, because that, you know, those are your resources: your life, your permanence, and your cards in hand.
I'm pretty sure the Lantern's ability is supposed to reflect its control over the shadow. So the front side is Tergrid and the back is her Lantern and the shadow's ability to cause, you know, panic, making them, you know, have to choose this thing. So I don't think it's the Lantern specifically that's causing this Punisher effect, but I think, at least I'm assuming, it's its control over the shadow. That would kind of make sense since she has such like a dual nature of her and the shadow, splitting that up over the front and the back of the card. I'm assuming that's what it is.
That makes sense with the Lantern's flavor text. When Tergrid was a child, her shadow tried to kill her. Only her Lantern keeps it at bay. So yeah, I think you're exactly right there.
All right. Any other words on Tergrid's? The front half of Tergrid, super build around me. If you don't have, like, if she's the only card in your deck, like, you're almost always going to play Tergrid's Lantern first, and then extra copies get to be Tergrid, so you can start stealing stuff, which seems really good. But, like, if you don't have any other way to make players discard cards or sacrifice stuff, like, it's not doing much. But, like, in Commander, that seems really cool, where there's so many different good options you can play. And also Tergrid Shadow, which makes players sacrifice creatures, and you get to steal them.
I saw a POC style deck list with Tergrid in it.
Was it for like
which
modern
is really cool,
or Commander?
I think it was standard.
Standard? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
For standard, and yeah, you know, making if you have a discard themed deck.
I was thinking Tergrid seems a lot better. Tergrid, the front half, seems a lot better in multiplayer, where you have more players to make discard stuff, and you can like wheel or whatever, make everyone discard their hand, then you get to steal 3 times as much stuff, or make everyone discard or sacrifice creatures so you get 3 times as much stuff.
Yeah.
But Tergrid's Lantern is only hits target player, not each opponent. So it doesn't quite scale the same way in multiplayer.
Yeah, much better in 2-player. So Tergrid's Shadow, I know you were always a fan of Butter and Blood.
Oh yeah.
You know, Mirrodin was one of the first sets we had the opportunity to play with together.
Yeah, if you couldn't afford Damnations in multiplayer or Wrath of Gods, you just played Butter and Blood, and except against token decks, it was still really, really good, like as a budget replacement. Tergrid's Shadow being an instant is interesting, but you don't really save any mana over Butter and Blood. Either playing it or foretelling it.
So, you usually you can say the upgrade from sorcery to instant is worth about a mana, and so the foretell is kind of gravy on it. The fact that you can pay it for the reduced cost by foretelling
you
it.
can still play it on turn 4 like Barter and Blood if you have 2 spare mana earlier in the game.
Yeah, and actually being an instant is a pretty big deal, because if they have one creature in play, you can wait until their turn for them to play a second creature.
That's true.
And then make them sacrifice both.
Yeah, I think it's a really good kind of budget replacement for a Wrath of God effect for a lot of scenarios.
Yeah,
it's cool. It's a cool card, and Foretell is
Tergrid Shadow
is neat. Very
very good mechanic. I thought I liked it during the spoiler season. It plays out very very well. So Tergrid Shadow also works very well with Tergrid.
Yeah.
Whereas a typical Wrath of God wouldn't. So the only thing is you have to have your own creatures to sacrifice, which may or may not be a problem.
Yeah, on top of Tergrid, you need 2 other spare ones to sacrifice without sacrificing her.
But you might have other spare ones from Tergrid.
Hopefully.
Because if you made them sacrifice other creatures earlier in the game, then those creatures are now yours.
Yeah. And you can always replace them with other ones that they've played since then.
Yes. Yes. So you're not really losing that much by sacrificing them.
Okay. Well, what I first expected was fear is, a natural thing. And there's gods of fear in other pantheons. Like Mars has an assistant or son, Phoebos and Deimos, the moons of Mars are named after, and they showed up in the Hercules movie. And fear, is just the companion that causes additional strife when, from war or what have you. There are other gods of fear, but fear in Norse, typically, you have in a warrior culture, fear of death is a fairly standard, and you have to act despite your fear, which she personifies. She's always got the shadow behind her, and she has to continue to fight it. And she's never defeating it. She just continues to live with it. That's a very Norse kind of thing.
Wow.
But it's not personified that way. I don't know of any Norse myth with lanterns or fear in particular. The closest is the Northern Lights are considered to be a lantern in the sky that the Valkyries use to survey. It's thought to be the light reflecting off the shields of the Valkyries or something like that, which makes the glow of Starnheim interesting. It's interesting. I would like to explore more why she's part of the tree in a sense, and why the tree sent the shadow. Or she and the shadow both come from the tree, and her sister obviously is the goddess of the tree. That's fine, but how this is connected to that, I didn't quite see. She doesn't seem to have a mother, right? There's not she may be the child of Alrund, but they deliberately chose to make her instead of yet another Hela kind of character. She's not the god of death, which is usually what I think would be reflected here. But then
there is a god of death. We just haven't gotten to him yet.
There is, and she is not it. It doesn't come from the tree. Whatever the god of death is, it's not part of Alrund's connection with the tree. Whatever that was. It's kind of interesting by itself.
Her card says God of Fright, but her biography says God of Fear. And I was wondering if, I always think of those two words as synonyms, but if there was a distinction between the two words that lined up with any other Norse mythology, I wanted to look into that.
Yeah, there isn't anything obvious. Fear is an ongoing state, whereas fright is the sudden, you change from you weren't afraid a moment ago and now you're afraid. Fright is, which, to give someone a fright, it's the action, it's the surprise that's going on. That's the only distinction. And I had to look that up because, like you, fear and fright are fairly close. Yeah. I wasn't sure what they were going for.
There is a distinction in Magic because fear is a ability that used to show up as a keyword, So maybe they were worried about confusing people if it said God of Fear, but then she has menace and not fear. But I don't think that was too big a concern.